Hello, good morning. Let me introduce myself. My name is Eduardo Ye. I'm the co-founder and CEO of a VR startup called Selves. We develop a experience portal for the enterprise. And I'm the moderator, and I want to thank all of you for coming to our session and the members of the panel. Thank you. I'm going to give a brief introduction of the panelists today. To my left, Jill Da Silva. She's the head of the UX strategy, a co-founder of Digital Karma. She's been designing digital products for over 15 years. Jill is an educator. She's a mentor, speaker, and consultant, also serving as the IXD advisory board member for the Santa Monica College, and is the lead UXDI instructor and global education strategy team member at General Assembly. Next to Jill is Quang-Wei Huang. He's the founder and CTO of VRadio. Prior to founding VRadio, Quang-Wei was lead engineer of Zeph, the most advanced YouTube technology partner today. He possesses a deep and diverse range of industry experiences, from early startup web and software engineering, server infrastructure architect, Cisco internet engineer, and AMD microprocessor design engineer. Next to Quang-Wei is Vincent. Vincent is the co-founder of Gesture Tech and recognized as a leader in the world of multimedia. He has personally overseen the creation of well over 400 Gesture Extreme virtual experience applications and has been in charge of more than 6,000 installations of Gesture Tech systems to various vertical markets. Then we have David Birnbaum. Is Birnbaum? Is that? Thanks. He's the design director at Immersive Corporation. He is a world expert in haptic design with over 10 years of experience and over 20 patents. He is driven by the desire to tell stories with a sense of touch and to bring emotion and realism to digital experiences. And finally, we have Andrew Beal, co-founder of WorldViz. Since the 1990s, he's helped pioneer the scientific use of VR for human behavioral research. Later, at MIT and NASA, he helped launch the first application of VR in space. And in 2002, he helped WorldViz become a leading provider of VR to Fortune 500 and government customers. Now, with all of the publicity around virtual reality, everyone is thinking about a life-changing experiences that will be made available to consumers and businesses. Now, our objective with our time today is to share some of the thinking when VR market matures and there's an abundance of virtual places to go. Now, unlike any other medium, what makes VR unique is the sense of presence, the belief that one has been transported to another space. Now, in the real world, space is continuous, where the different spaces are all contained within the same universe, connected by distance traveled. In VR, different spaces are not continuous. Instead, they are essentially in different dimensions, with no ability to travel between them except for what is provided by the creator of the space. Now, the ability to navigate within and between one world to another is key and essential to keeping people immersed and connected to the virtual universe. Now, I'll ask the panelists to discuss and debate the current state of navigation and transportation within VR, and then take us into the future, 5 years from now, and give us a glimpse of the VR world that you see.
Yeah, I guess I can get started first. So I'm Quang-Wei from Video. So we're an immersive video distribution platform for virtuality videos or 360 videos. It's probably one of the most static formats out of what everybody works on here, because it's just it's a traditional. I mean, it's a virtuality video, but it's still a video. Like it's pre-recorded, so at the current form, there's no head tracking, so you cannot move your head like left and right and see the perspective move. But you can rotate your head, so it's an active viewing experience. So I would say the transportation and navigating in this kind of environment would really rely on UI and navigation. So I would say this is an active viewing experience. Like so, for example, with traditional TV viewing, you would take the TV remote and then you would switch the channel, and that's how you would switch between the static frame content. That's how we call them, because when email first came out, you had to call the old mail snail mail, right? With immersive video, you really feel like you're immersed in there, and you're completely surrounded. So there's no frame. So like one of our most popular experiences, the Nepal earthquake footage, when you're it really places you in Nepal. This could be your life, and it's an ultimate sympathy machine, because like you feel like you could be there, and this could be you. And Syria as well, like you see the destruction of the world around you in that city. So we have usually use one input, so either a click or you can tap on the Gear VR, and that will pop up a virtual 3D menu that's in front of you, and using that you can navigate to other recommended videos, or you can navigate back to where you were, or you can seek the video, go back and forth, that kind of thing. Yeah, so that's currently where we are. And then in the main user interface, you have you're surrounded by video thumbnails, and then that way you can actually look and tap and select to go between different videos. So that is a much more active viewing experience, an active selection experience that matches kind of like the immersion that you have versus like a TV remote that you just go up and down. So that's kind of what we're doing. And then in the future, I can see us using annotation, for example. So if you're watching like a horror movie experience, and you walk down the end of a hallway, you can look between two different doors, and you'll see them light up. So you can like choose which one you want to go next. You can tap on one of them, and then they'll stream you to another video that like continues that experience. So that is potentially one thing that we can do. Yeah, and then in the future, there's also going to be potentially light field videos, or photogrammetry videos where like a whole room is captured in volumetric capturing format. Then you'll be able to navigate and move around in that room freely as well. Then the world opens up from there.
Okay, thank you for your insights. Andrew, can you share your insights with us?
Yeah, thank you. Happy to. Let me just state by explaining my involvement with WorldViz is essentially a company. We manufacture a product that allows authors, creative types to create immersive virtual environments and combine it with a motion tracking system that we also build ourselves to create a soup to nuts solution that allows people to move through a wide walking experience. And I'm just curious if anybody in the room tried our walking system that's down the hall. It's the walk the plank. If you haven't tried a walking experience, this is a chance to do it, because getting out of your seat is key to, I think, getting a taste of what presence can be. And I'd like to connect to the word that Eduardo used, and that's continuous versus discontinuous when we're talking about navigating spaces. I think in much of what the content here, and I think what's standing to be one of the really rich content areas for VR initially is the video. And I think the video storytelling experience has a history of a discontinuous experience. We jump from one perspective to another. And the viewers, we know how to handle that. We're not trying to build a vertical 3D model, and we allow for that. When you jump to the more, in my view, more traditional type of VR, since I've been doing VR since about 2002, is a 3D model that you're simulating. You're trying to allow somebody to transport that through that. That actually, I would say most of our customers conceive of that as a continuous space. If they had their druthers, they would be able to walk through the entire third floor of a new hospital reconstruction project. The fact is, we just don't have a tracking area big enough to allow that. So we have to sometimes inject some discontinuity in that navigation. And when you're dealing with a 3D model, it's problematic because you're basically, you are really, when you're doing the 3D simulation, you're confined by the Cartesian coordinates of X, Y, Z, yaw, pitch, and roll. So I would like to point out, just with my intro here, a couple of experiences we've had working with real customers trying to solve some real problems that happen when you navigate through spaces. And one, in a 3D model type space, like say a large remodel of a hospital, if I want to jump discontinuously to another space, you can use the teleporter metaphor. And anyone experience the bullet train demo that was actually very, very well done at Oculus Connect a couple of weeks ago? You would hold your controller, you would shoot a beam of plasma like 50 feet, 100 feet away from you, and wherever that beam was pulsating, you would instantly jump to. Now, unfortunately, despite the great demo and the visuals, they did a fatal flaw in that demo, and that's that you teleported to that other location, but they rotated you back to look at where you came from or look at the alien that was attacking you. And what does that do? That completely obliterates your mental model of where you are in the space. The correct way to do it, and I'm identifying past work that's been done by some researchers, in this case Profit and Pausch, you aim at another space, and you can, a very good way to do it is called world in miniature. Let's say I'm doing this hospital project, a remodel, I want to walk over the entire floor. I take the entire experience that I'm inside of, I shrink it down to something that's now the size of my body. So it's maybe 2 meters by 2 meters. I see myself standing where I actually am. So it's like a world in miniature model. I grab my avatar and I place it where I want to go in the model. Same transporter problem I just described, but now my view falls into the orientation of that avatar without a virtual rotation. So I've effected a virtual translation, but not a virtual rotation. Really a key distinction to make between those two if you're trying to allow somebody to have a cohesive experience and understand their ability to go through that environment. And if I could just, one more example here. I mentioned our company specializes in walking VR. To me, it's kind of a shame right now we see so much seated VR. And a thing that people are doing wrong in much of this, from a navigation point of view, is doing full virtual rotation. So you use a controller or something, and you virtually rotate, you virtually translate. So let me do a thought experiment right now with everybody. I do this sometimes, and I want you to give me your kind of gut reaction when I ask the question. Don't think it through too hard, because the gut reaction is actually what plays and affects people when they're in these simulations. So if you would, close your eyes, and now imagine you are walking forward 10 feet. Now, with your eyes still closed, imagine you are turning to your right 90 degrees. Now walk forward 10 more feet. Now from that location, point to where you started. And do that quickly. Okay, so I can't see everybody's responses. A classic mistake is pointing back over your left shoulder. Okay? That's a 90-degree error. The correct response is pointing back over your right shoulder. And then David here, I think, got that right. Now, that was a thought experiment. If you look at real data, where you look at people using a joystick to rotate and drive through a space, that exact error is found in real virtual environments, not just these thought experiment ones. And you can alleviate that error. In this particular instance, we found, others have found, it's a little more painstaking, but you have people, instead of using a joystick to rotate, they have to be on a stool that pivots. And they use their feet, or they use a handlebar hoop around them, and they rotate their body to turn. And they're only given one virtual actuator, and that's fore and aft. They do a physical rotation, and what you're doing there is you're then activating your vestibular system. And now all that error goes away. Big difference. So this is another example of where we've worked with customers to try and find solutions to these problems that otherwise will confound you when you create these virtual environments. So in my just outlook to the future is, and a question really to the panelists, I'm curious to know of uses of non-visual cues that can help us perform navigation, either the discontinuous or continuous kind, throughout virtual spaces. And I'd love to hear. And I think that we will find those, and I think David here will speak to some of those, but in other modalities, I'm very curious.
Thank you for sharing. Well, since you mentioned David, you know, I will be very interested in know how, you know, like Andrew was mentioning about, you know, the input forms. You know, you're just in there, but what can you in there? The element of agency and haptics, you know, how the touch, you know, how that comes as far as in the navigating and transporting within virtual worlds.
Sure. So just quick introduction. So I work for Immersion Corporation, which was mentioned. Immersion is kind of the world leader in haptics. Has anyone heard of haptics? Good. This has changed since a certain fruit company has started investing in marketing, so that's great. Yeah, haptics is the digital sense of touch. So the idea is we have optics for your eye, so we have haptics for your hand. How do you engage the sense of touch in a digital experience? And Immersion has been working in virtual reality. It's been working in gaming. If you've ever felt a rumble experience, it was originating from Immersion. We have actuators in phones, in wearables, so really anywhere that the kind of internet is meeting your sense of touch, we like to get involved. And we're kind of, where I'm coming from is kind of how do you design the experience? So we have a great technical team that developing the technical side, but kind of my team's responsible for what is that for, and how do we tell stories? How do we enable things like advertising, enable people to meet each other and kind of touch each other through the phone. So these sound kind of radical ideas, but the reality is that you can use really a very small amount of tactile stimulation to go a long way. So even though that these only vibrate, we can create a multimodal design. So we can add a visual component, and we can design the vibration in kind of an advanced way with texture and envelope and things like that, so that you actually do have a strong emotional illusion that there's somebody there in your phone that you're physically interacting with. So the challenge, I think, right now for the virtual reality industry is what is the right set of metaphors and technologies for the sense of touch. I personally feel like virtual reality is sort of a hyperbolic term, right? Like virtual reality. So when you set that expectation with consumers that this is like reality, and then you put them in a headset and they're like, wow, it really looks like reality, and then the rest of their body is just left ignored, I think that that's disappointing. And it actually speaks to how in our culture we really believe that vision is so dominant for our judgment of kind of what constitutes an experience. We know that consciously, but actually subconsciously, kind of below the surface, it's not true. And we actually do believe that touch is kind of the signifier of reality. We see this in things like when you say, like, pinch me to let me know if I'm dreaming. It's like, it might look real, it might sound real, but if I can feel it, if you pinch me and I feel it, then it's reality. So we actually do have like this grounding in our bodies. And then we go into virtual reality and, you know, some discussion about ways of kind of engaging the body just enough with kind of the minimal amount of technology and investment to get people to believe that they have transcended reality, I think is kind of the key question for us. And I think that kind of would take us from something like a shallow sense of presence that breaks down very quickly to a deeper and more lasting sense of presence. So I guess some talk about what we think is possible. So we're really interested in using like mass market devices and simple devices, like the phone you already have in your pocket. It's a haptic device. We can do a lot with that. Our software is probably in that device. So now how can we build like the platform for virtual reality, and what's the metaphor? Is it inertial? Is it with the touch screen? And how do you kind of give tactile stimulation to the hand in such a way that you are convinced that you're touching a real object or in a real place? I think the holy grail is grasping. So like you're in a place, you see something, you reach out, and the ability to believe you're grasping a doorknob or an object is going to be really, really key for everything from commerce to, you know, socialization. And I think that we don't need an exoskeleton for that, but I have some ideas around how we could achieve that with kind of mass market devices. But the key is really to get the metaphor exactly right, and then there's going to be kind of this deeper sense of presence.
Okay, thank you, David. In fact, I want to make a comment on what David said as far as how touch is important, because in our solution, we use the smartphone that we all carry as the input device in virtual reality. And we just did this just to experiment with. And then we will have people that have never experienced VR before telling us how they feel more grounded in VR because they're so familiar. This thing of holding the smartphone has become so like, you know, an extension of ourselves that now carrying that into the virtual world has created that more of a believability that they are in there. So, you know, thanks for sharing your thoughts. I wanted to now go to Jill. Jill is being an expert in user experience, user interface, you know, from all the medias. And now there is this exciting new world of virtual reality. So please share with us how that changes and how the challenges that you face in taking, where before the traditional media, like Juan Wei said, you could just pick the content you want and you just choose and experience it. But in virtual reality, you are being taken to places. What are the opportunities there?
Well, thank you for having me here today. I feel like I'm still so new myself to virtual reality, but I think the usability principles still stay the same. And I think that this excellent panel has touched on those principles and by the means of touch and is it real and the ability of limited space and staying seated. I think that those are the challenges that we face. I think that some of our other panelists have mentioned on the fact that it needs to seem continuous. And I think that the same principles will lie here in virtual reality as well as any other experience design, and that the locus of control needs to stay with the user. Just as Andrew said, there was a fatal flaw because they turned the user around, but the user didn't choose to turn around. So it needs to stay in the hands of the user. Otherwise, it doesn't seem real, and it actually becomes scary a little bit because you're in this virtual world and all of a sudden you have no control. So I feel like that some of the principles, some of the usability principles that I think will have to continue and to remain would be it needs to be learnable, whatever you're creating. It needs to be efficient. It needs to be memorable. How you handle errors needs to be creative. And there needs to be satisfaction. I think it's important to use as many of the things that we are already familiar with, especially when we're talking about introducing VR to people that maybe aren't super early adopters or very tech savvy. And I think that while there's so many uses right now and potential uses for VR, I think that some of the basics is that it needs to do what I need it to do, right? It needs to be useful. It must be usable. I must be able to accomplish my task. And it must be desirable. I must like using it as well. And the other piece to that is emotional. I have a good feeling about this brand. As Eduardo said, there's a lot of commercial aspects to this. And I feel like the whole core purpose of VR is a user-centered experience. If you are not considering the user throughout the entire piece, you'll fail. And I think that these gentlemen up here are doing great work in understanding how to make it usable, how to make it more immersive, how to give that sense of presence. Because all day yesterday I was thinking about, unless we create this 3D space, this large space, how can we really convince people that it's real? Because what type of floor can actually move that much, and how do you do that? So my brain is just racing, like, how will these gentlemen do this? It's a happy challenge, but it's exciting to see where it will go. And you know, it's still story-based design. You know, you can't build feature-based design in VR. You have to definitely do the entry point, exit point, think of every step along the way. And I'm curious to see what will happen with latency of rendering and being able to have that 360-degree view. I honestly don't know what the future will be, but I know that the steps to get there will be the same. It will be design, iteration, refine, test, design again, iterate, design, and test, and that's what will keep us moving forward.
Okay. All right, thanks, Jill. Vincent. Vincent has some visuals to share with us, and please, come on.
Gesture Tech is the company that invented all the video gesture control technology over the last 30 years. So we were around at the beginning of the 1980s and through the 90s VR revolution. And essentially what Gesture Tech was trying to do, a lot of what we were doing was sort of the antithesis of what was happening with head mounts, which were very heavy, and data gloves that were very wired, and people really couldn't move a lot, and we wanted to get people really engaged, more full body. So the video gesture control that we were creating and the types of virtual experiences that we were putting people into were more, like obviously completely hands-free. A lot of them were experiencing on displays or in cave-like experiences or experiences that immersed you, but it wasn't on your head. And we did do some experimentation with head-mounted displays where the user wore it, but the amount of wires involved at the time and the heaviness of it, putting the user's image in it in the way we sort of immersed. We started off with like just 2D cameras, fully tracking the user's body, being able to know everything about what they're doing, and then allowing them to, be able to be tracked and interact within the virtual world. On a normal installation, they'd be watching the displays in front of themselves and leaning right or left or up or down to navigate through the worlds, either 2D worlds or, in this case, 3D worlds. And obviously, we're using the camera, a 2D camera at this point, to do that. When we tried putting people into head mounts, we were able to get the interaction and be able to look around in the 360 degrees, but it really was that freedom of moving that was the issue with the wires at that point. And obviously, we're moving into a period now where things are becoming more mobile and the wires are becoming less of a problem. In terms of the types of navigation, just a little volume here, we allowed users to come up to portals or moments in worlds where they could choose choose to go this way, that way, jump to a new world, etc. And then the leaning the right, left, up, and down, and leaning forward and backwards as far as speed and traveling through those virtual worlds. One of the things we did actually very early on was work with the Star Trek franchise and Paramount Pictures to create an actual application that used the footage from Star Trek and actual transporter rooms and holodecks, and we ended up creating something for that where you actually beamed from one. You made your choice and you beamed from a deck to another place, and then we actually integrated this into a lot of our games. A lot of the games went out with that as a metaphor in terms of how you chose to transport to one world of another. And then on the social level, we started experimenting, this is sort of like late 90s now, with bringing people in from different parts of the world, literally across T1 lines, because it took that much to be in the same world and to be able to interact together and see it from their own perspective. And then in this particular case, we've got a single perspective of where they are. So that's sort of a lot of changes of perspective, giving you a very cinematic feel for the experiences, but being 3D worlds, letting you have your own perspective on that. All of these things that we're looking at, I'm just going to jump from that one, apply today in different ways. When we sort of essentially created the 3D gesture control using 3D depth cameras, it was early on when they were like, whatever, $20,000, but slowly, we were doing a lot of installations, and this particular metaphor where the hand was navigating like flying a plane. We did this for the British Columbia, Vancouver actually Olympics, sending it around so people could fly through British Columbia, recreating the whole textured landscapes of different parts of BC so you could fly through the mountains, etc. Just with the simple metaphor of using your hand as the flight navigation, forward, backwards. So, we've looked at point and control, we've looked at full immersion. We've looked at multi-touch, two hands, all sorts of different metaphors for how you can use cameras and gesture control to do the navigation. And obviously, with head-mounted displays today, you can have a camera from a 3D camera from a distance looking at you, or you can use a camera that's giving you depth information and various types of modalities that are gesture type of experiences that could be used to navigate and control the content as you're traveling through these worlds. Sorry, hang on. Let me stop that. How do I get? Okay. But the main idea is that you've got a lot of different ways to do that. Obviously, nowadays on head-mounted displays, you've got leap motion with some 3D information as to tracking the hand. You can use 3D depth cameras from distance to either bring your image in or just use that information for point of control and just leaning right, left. There's a lot of different ways that you can. I'm just going to jump through this. Sorry, these are interactive surfaces. But one of the things we also did was to use mobile phones. So we're on 150 million mobile phones around the world using the camera as a gesture, what we called optic flow. And we ended up with all these different gesture control, some, whatever, like 44 different patents we licensed to Sony for the iToy, Microsoft for the Xbox, the Kinect, Hasbro, this is Docomo. But in all these situations, we're using different forms of gesture control. With this, the mobile phone is, as it moves through space, it's got optic flow, so it knows it's 3D space. Obviously, in mobile, you can start to use that sense of the camera being on the mobile phone, even though it's looking in and giving you your 3D world. As you're moving, you're getting optic flow from that camera. So you can actually use the cameras on mobile phones to start to get that. So we've really just moved back into the area of starting to experiment again with head-mounted displays now that we moved into a much more mobile space with that. But we really do feel that like gesture control, freeing people up, using their full bodies is really an important part of the whole 3D world. Okay, thanks.
Vincent, thank you. As Vincent was telling us all the gesture control, it made me think, I want to ask the audience, if you could just have full body motion in virtual reality, and I want to ask, who would want to simply like walk like we normally do in a physical reality? Can you raise your hands if you just want to freely walk? Okay. And how about fly? If you could navigate by flying. Okay. And how about like teletransportation? All right. I think that I feel that a lot of times we want to do things that where we cannot do in reality, and those are some of the sort of the languages, the new metaphors that I think will make virtual reality so cool for us to go from one place to another. I asked each member the panel to come up with a question for the panel. So, Andrew, you asked already yours, but if you could, Jill, we can start with you.
Yeah, and this could be to anyone on the panel, I think. From a user experience standpoint, I always think about, is it useful and does it solve a need? And I'm just curious about your opinions about the future of VR and where do you see the most useful, beneficial application of VR?
I'll jump in from a business point of view. We are already seeing it as an incredibly useful tool for product visualization, and I don't mean just like a something that you can visualize on a desktop, but like I was speaking to, a remodel of an entire building, a new design for a tractor, for an aircraft. So, back to your question, Eduardo, about walking versus flying versus teleporting. There's a lot to be said for the value of walking. As mundane as it is, it's when you want somebody to critique a new tractor that's half the size of this room. There's no comparison to allowing somebody to get off their butt and walk around it and crawl under it and really experience it and try and find out design flaws or maintenance issues that are going to come as a result of that. So.
I'll just jump in because you said the word useful. And so to me, the most useful application, we already have a whole health division with our company in terms of using our gesture control, the immersive worlds you saw there that got people moving with their whole body, and we have a rehabilitation application that is in about 700 hospitals that leads people through their rehabilitation. But there's a whole realm of health applications for VR, and including especially with head-mounted displays, that it's the engagement in the world that actually in the rehabilitation side gets people to be active. They feel that they're not just moving a cup back and forth. They're actually seeing themselves in a world. There's a motivation to do things. They'll do it 2 to 3 times longer just because they're in it. It's a game-like experience, but it's the reality of the experience. You could be a game of like move these cups as fast as you want. That's not the same as being in a world, being transported, something new, something to do. So there's a whole realm in terms of creating worlds that and forms of interaction, and the fact that you can look around in 360 degrees and be active and moving and lead people through types of experiences that will engage them. And then there's a whole application, I think, in terms of just, for disabilities. We sell a lot of the interactive floors and walls and stuff, and there's like literally thousands of sensory rooms or snoozling rooms around the world for people with severe disabilities who, the rooms are to stimulate their senses, and VR is that perfect technology for that application. And that it's, they have limited movement, but little bits of movement, you can still do a lot of stuff to give people experiences and to sort of like take them like to worlds they're never going to be able to get to, but give them a sensory experience. And then of course there's mental health applications. So I do really think that the health side of the VR is going to be the most useful.
I guess I'll jump in. So, I'm thinking more long term. So we were talking about 5 years, 10 years. What is going to really be the application that gets everyone involved in this new medium? And I think that it's togetherness. So today we are isolated by our technology. It's always that way. We design experiences first around single places or apps or applications in a general way, and we go and we do that by ourselves, and that's good for a while, and eventually somebody has the brilliant idea to kind of apply the technology to social experiences to allow people to be together. I think we're fundamentally lonely as a species. We want to be with the people that we love. We want to be with our friends. We are living in a world now where geography separates us from the people we want to be with. It's just the nature of things. We go to college in one place, we work somewhere else, then we move for our job, and people are scattered across the globe, and so you have technology come in and let people be together in kind of this very, very shallow way. We can write short text strings to each other, and this is like a very, very big deal. We can even send them little smiley faces or frowny faces, right? And people can't live without this because we so crave this emotional connection with others. So I think that virtual reality kind of contains this promise of transcendence, and it will, when we can apply that to being together, I think that's really the biggest revolution I think maybe technology will ever have offered us so far.
Okay.
And also another thing I want to say is that accessibility is actually very important, because some of these patients are bedridden and they cannot experience the world other than going through the window of somebody else's eyes, where somebody else take a 360 camera and go to friends or go to Paris and film the Eiffel Tower. But another thing is, I would just say, don't ever underestimate the fundamental laziness of people. So a lot of these are pretty cool, like walking, flying, and teleport. So flying and teleporting is probably the easiest because you just hold a controller and you can kind of move around in the virtuality space. But walking, I think, is actually the most involved, because in physical space you probably have to be standing up and walk around. Or you can still use a controller, but I think walking would be pretty cool. I think there's research being done that you can actually walk around in the limited space, but actually walk in virtuality space. You feel like you're walking forever, but in actuality, you're just walking around your room in circles. So I think that's one pretty cool way, and I think maybe Andrew can speak more to this, but I can see that being very useful too for like exercise as well, that kind of thing.
Oh, so Wang Wei, can you ask your question that you prepared?
Yeah. So I guess my question is, this is probably more for Andrew, because you touched on this earlier that you can walk around in a like how do you navigate around using limited Cartesian space? So have you guys kind of like research into how to navigate around in the infinite space but using the limited Cartesian space?
Yeah, so you were just kind of referring to that even before the question. So in many ways, I think for the kind of work that I've been involved in, the Holy Grail is kind of being able to literally walk as far as you want, run as far as you want. I personally have not been involved in the 2D treadmill industry, and that's one approach, and that's building a treadmill that can move in 2 dimensions without hurting people. And there have been a good dozen very valiant attempts. None are prime time yet, unfortunately. That's the Holy Grail in many ways for, I think, engaging the body. And engage in the body, it activates various processes that we've evolved to have to do wayfinding. So as I was speaking in my intro, when you activate those, you get a lot of extra like processing oomph that can be very useful for all sorts of applied tasks. But you referred to what I call redirected walking, and that's taken advantage of all of our perceptual systems have limitations. We have thresholds, and so if you allow somebody to walk forward, but you very slowly rotate the world. So they're aiming for the door, they're trying to get out of here, but you keep turning the door to the left a little bit as they walk, they're going to counter their direction. And if you do it at a threshold that's low enough, they won't know that you're spinning the world around them, and they won't know that they're walking in a curved trajectory. The number of researchers doing this in practice, those thresholds are fairly sensitive to that. So you still need a pretty large space. You can't take like a 20 by 20 foot room and suddenly give somebody the sense that they're running through a football field. Nowhere close to that. So.
Maybe in Japan they will, because the spaces are so small.
They have to figure out a way.
Yes.
Or maybe lean the room.
Yeah, or maybe have a couple beers first,
That's right. Okay. Vincent, do you have a question for the panel?
Yeah, because you were asking in terms of like towards the future, I'd ask the question, what sort of limitations are you currently experiencing with VR, head-mounted VR, and what kind of technology would you like someone to invent to overcome that that's not here today?
Anyone?
Well, as I was kind of asking in my question, I think what modalities can we start to actuate in people other than just vision? I mean, a lot of people, we have a great exception here, think that virtual reality equals visual reality. And we have haptics, we have acoustics, we have vestibular, and then we have the really, really hard ones, and that's taste and smell. But can we invent some methods, some actuations that those properties can combine to let us get through spaces, or to, I mean, smell can be incredibly provocative in terms of helping you have a landmark. So can sound. On the hallway, I was talking to somebody, Matthias and others, about we use almost like an anywhere door. Anybody know that metaphor? It's a Japanese storytelling, I think, metaphor, where you walk up to a door, you go through it into another world, and you come back out the door. So we have a holodeck type experience, and every time you come back, the menu is always pointing, oriented, and centered physically in the exact same place it always is in the real world. You might think, why does that matter? Because you're in the virtual. Well, it matters because I'm letting people walk, and they build up the sense that over time they know that they've got 15 feet. They can actually, if they want to, they can run that direction. So using that sort of as a grounding principle. We don't combine that with touch. We don't put a little piece of nice carpet down, but I know it, like the folks at Oculus, they're very good at actually trying to use a little bit of floor haptics for just pads. to rely on that, but to combine that with smell or other cues. But in terms of deep technologies, we're grappling with some real fundamental, I think, human interaction problems that you certainly have grappled with your ability to map good gestures onto the technology. It's not going to be a silver bullet of just the silicon. We're dealing with the webware too, and have to really wrap ourselves around the problems and the capacities of human beings.
Well, and I want to bring up about deep technologies on live action, the immersive video capturing side. Today, like, you've been transported from, in front of the screen into the scene, through immersive video. But you're still like just standing there, you're looking around. It's already a big deal. But where do you see the future going as far as being able to now go beyond that, even navigating inside the movie or whatever the place you've been taken to? What are the technologies that will enable us to do that? Please share with us.
Yeah, I guess I can speak on this. So obviously there's been some camera manufacturers that have been experimenting with these first with static photography. And these are usually like light field photography where you can, in one photo, it actually captures, so basically you can kind of imagine in a rectangular or cube space where every point is one camera. So that camera captures all the light coming from every direction through that one camera. And then as you move your head, you can actually simulate the viewing of that. So that's one potential way to enable head tracking. So you can actually move your head and you can see a different kind of perspective and also camera rotation. So that's one way to do it. But obviously the challenges for there is media compression. So it's going to be a tremendous amount of bandwidth required to send all of these. Obviously there's like compression techniques. But I think the real way to solve that problem would be through photogrammetry, where you have volumetric capturing of the entire space, and then reconstructing the 3D models with the models and textures. And then when you apply to video, you actually be doing motion capturing and actually moving the models around, and then also applying the corresponding texture. And obviously you need to hit like 30 frames per second or 60 frames per second, so that's more difficult, but it'll be order of magnitude less bandwidth in terms of streaming that versus live field.
Okay. So eventually I think we'll be able to invite friends to your house, to your virtual house, which is the identical replica of your real house, right? So I want to move to David with your question.
Sure. So I was considering the question, and we were talking about transitions, translations, movement between worlds, and kind of the thing that happens even today, even though kind of VR platforms are fragmented, is moving between the actual world and the virtual world. And just my personal experience is anecdotal, but I find that moving from the actual world to the virtual world is pretty smooth. I know I'm going to do it. I want to do it. And then the new world is hyper-stimulating, engaging, and a lot of fun. And then I take it off, and I'm at my desk in my office, and it's terribly disappointing. And so I'm wondering kind of how to make that transition smooth and designed and a little bit more maybe gradual. How do we kind of ease people in and out of these virtual experiences and kind of achieve this blending between the virtual and the actual that we believe is part of the promise of VR?
I've actually thought about this before. We haven't implemented it, but I actually thought about potentially when you're navigating different videos. So you're starting kind of like your living room or some kind of space, and then when you look at a video and you're gonna watch it, there'll be an animation that actually puts on the headset, like in the virtuality space. So it's kind of like Inception, you know. You're in virtuality space, but you're putting on another headset, and then that transitions you into that video, and then kind of completely surrounds you in a 360 space. And then when you exit out of that video, you actually take your hand and like take it down again in the virtuality space, and then you bring it back to the screen. So potentially that's one way to transition you. So it's kind of like you're in a world inside another world.
That's very interesting. Very concrete. Cool. Makes sense.
I would just add one thing, and that's kind of reliability of the spaces, and that's if you or entering, some sort of predictability of what you're going to enter. And I've been seeing in my office, putting on the headset at my desk. I've got a standing desk and looking around and taking off, and knowing that what's going to be there, what was there, is back there, so that I have, and if I were to put this on in a different room, for that reliability to be a different space that's repeatable, I think we've built up some expectations that would help remove some of the artifice.
Thank you. Vincent, I have a question for you. Will the houses in the future will come installed with all this computer vision, like camera tracking, as part of the electricity we have today?
Well, I think it's sort of twofold progress forward. I mean, one of the things that's happening, obviously, is the cost of cameras is becoming, nil, at least, super low. So the ability to embed them in things is becoming that much easier, whether it's electronics or toys or, flat screens or whatever. And obviously, our screens are becoming bigger, and as far as the display manufacturer is concerned, we will have walls that are, essentially portals to what we, as far as whether that's a video conferencing, transportation into a virtual world with other people. So there's a lot of uses in the house. I don't know in terms of, if anyone's done anything yet to produce something in manufacture where people can feel guaranteed that the camera's turned off, so that it's, you're happy to have them in your house without having to think about whether they're on or off, or whether they're, picking up. But I think, once that's in place, and once people can be assured that when they want the cameras on, they're on, when they want them off, they're off, then yeah, I think so.
Okay. 5 years from now, or even 10 years, do we see a world where the virtual reality experience feels more like the apps that we have today in smartphones, where you go to one and you exit another one? Or do we want a world that is interconnected, like the web, where you are in a particular experience and you can jump into another related world, within let's say the same context? It's like the hyperlinks on websites. What do you all think?
I think we want it all. I mean, I think the diversity is the experience of life, and so any way that you can transpose, or whether it's like jumping to someplace or whether it's traveling, I think that those experiences are valuable in themselves, and so I don't think that it's one or the other. I think that there'll be a whole plethora of types of ways of navigating and transporting, and they'll be as valuable as people enjoy them, and I think they'll want to change it up at different points in time. But I do think there'll be a connected, endless web that you can continue to travel. But I think you're going to want to jump every once in a while.
Okay.
I like to say just reemphasize my point. Don't underestimate the laziness of people. So sometimes, in a virtuality space, say you have like 2 virtual stores next to each other, you'll probably only go the next one down immediately. So the featured kind of store or featured app, that's still pretty important. And then I think I would still say the next thing is potentially still search, because back when the web was created and a lot of the virtual stores were set up, there was kind of people set up virtuality stores, and like people actually have to walk through a virtual mall to find something, but turns out that just Amazon is still the most successful example. Like, you just search for things and you find what they are. But obviously there's still recommended items, and that's still very useful, because you're still gonna visit the next store down from you, but you're not gonna like walk 100 miles to go to buy something.
I just want to say, I mean, that may be the case. I think that some of the open world games, though, may contradict that. I mean, so people enjoy, I mean, in Grand Theft Auto and things like that, people enjoy the idea of, your mission is a few miles away, you have to get there. There's some like sort of sense of presence that is preserved when you preserve some parts of reality and kind of build them into the game or the experience. So I mean, I think it's a two-way street. I think like if you make it too easy, it starts to feel less real. And so you kind of have to preserve some perception of spatial distance, and maybe you can shrink it and play with it, and maybe you can use metaphors to kind of get around the more like onerous aspects of it. But I think you do have to preserve, like we have relationships to people and objects around us. That's kind of defines like being. And so if we want to make a reality, I think we need to kind of think about how to preserve that.
No, I think that's true, and I think to Vincent's point, we do want to keep all of them, so you can fly there, you can walk there, or you can teleport there if you're lazy.
Yeah, from a perspective of a company that builds developer tools, I think even the manufacturers are grappling with this right now. So we're seeing very different approaches by, say, Oculus and HTC Vive. The Vive unit, they're both fantastic units. The Vive unit comes basically with a whole layer of they call it the compositor, I believe. You start it up, you're in a cohesive environment, and as you jump from one demo to another, you always come back through a kind of a common sort of metaphorical visual space. It's wireframe looking, there's a center, you can see back where you are. It's much like what I was speaking to, we do with our kind of quote-unquote anywhere door. Oculus is taking a different approach. They're kind of letting developers choose their own way, building their own structure around that. I'm not providing this kind of almost like what's the Steam sort of interface, almost like the Amazon marketplace that's always there with the click of a button. So.
Well, we have, let's see, 3 minutes, so I want to open up to a few questions from the audience.
I'm curious what the panelists think of the various forms of omnidirectional treadmills.
Omnidirectional treadmills.
Are you referring to just what I was referring to as 2D treadmills, or the very specific ones that are kind of hitting the game market right now that are kind of these
by 2D, you
bowls?
You do mean omnidirectional?
Yeah, so 2D meaning you have an X and Y vector capable, so you can, 2D treadmill, you can actually push anybody in any direction as the composite vector of those two, and they're made in different ways. There's basically a whole array of balls that are actuated underneath. There's 2 belts that are made out of thin cylinders, so the counterposing belt underneath can cause a composite vector. And then there are these more passive systems that you are standing inside of a bowl, essentially, and you can turn and you can kind of slide your feet in any direction, but you're not actually moving. You're not getting any of the vestibular activation of that. So they're all very, very intriguing. The latter ones I was just speaking of are being targeted more towards the consumer market. They're less sophisticated than the ones that are more in the sort of the research or the military realm, and as such, they're in the $500,000 sort of price range. None have solved it that I've experienced myself.
Yes.
Do any of you have any experience in the role that education is going to play with AR and VR with this technology? And I think what I've seen in all the panels I've seen so far, the elephant in the room is how do kids play into this? I mean, we don't want to see the thing on kids, but they're the next wave of users. Where do they come into play?
Actually, I think virtuality will do wonders for education scenarios like flight simulation, where it's actually very expensive to take flying lessons in a real plane. But in the virtuality, you can actually look all the way around you. And traditionally, a full setup for flight sim is pretty expensive to set up at home. I'm actually a licensed pilot, so I've been flying with the flight. I actually started with Microsoft Flight Sim, and just passed through all the classes, and before I took real classes in real planes. But it's pretty expensive to set up at home. You need a pretty large monitor, ideally 3. I was poor. I was a college student, so I couldn't afford it. So I just set up my joystick. There's a little hat on top that you can move left and right, and then if you move left, then the monitor moves to the left. It's kind of disorienting, but that's the only way you can do it. And then you move right and look to the right window. But the thing is, now with virtuality headset, you can actually just look to the right, and you can look all the way around you, and you can find that fighter plane that's trying to shoot you, and you can try to turn around and shoot him back.
So I would just add, I've given talks to the K through 6 and taken a couple of Gear VRs, other systems, and I don't think it's a question of if. It's more like a question of what. I think it's just a ripe, rich area for a video, and it really speaks to the quote that is out there that the memory through VR is of being there, not of watching it. right? That child goes home that day having been there. And we are at a point where we can evoke all sorts of, I think, emotions and experiences. And we've got to ask which ones do we want to use that kind of power with.
Okay, go ahead.
So I was wondering what you think the future of AR is alongside VR, particularly in regards to user interfaces. So augmented reality, so things that don't fully subsume your visual and audio senses.
Jill, do you have any?
Jump in.
Yeah.
Nobody.
I feel like, because I actually have a child who's 10, and he won't wear the Oculus for very long. So, you know, while I see the benefits of education there, I also wonder, until there are improvements about how we've evolved as humans and what feels real, and if you get off of using an Oculus, do you feel dizzy like you just got off an elevator or a boat? Until those are improved, I don't see him wanting to do it for very long. However, the AR, I can see him wanting to use that more, because I feel like there's that sense of presence is there, but there's still that willing suspension of disbelief. And I think that in terms of UI, do you mean as far as what will that look like? How will you?
How is it different when you work with AR versus VR?
VR. Yeah, I feel like it's still not as immersive, but I feel like the locus of control is there's a little more safety sense when it's more of an augmented reality versus an immersed reality.
Yeah, I think in virtuality, you kind of worry about people like falling over in real space,
Mm-hmm.
like, or if they're not on a free pivot chair, or like like if I'm sitting on this kind of chair, I cannot easily move all the way back, so you're kind of limited. I think our research shows like your head can move left and right 150 degrees pretty comfortably, and maybe up and down 30 degrees to 50 degrees. So basically everything, like all the UI needs to be within that space. But for augmented reality, yeah, basically, when the time becomes mainstream for augmented reality, so the headset will probably go from ski goggles like today to like just like regular glasses, and then you'll just be awesome because you can walk around in real life, and then you'll be scanning the surroundings and recognizing objects and then superimposing things on top of that. So I would say it's a different problem. It's an open problem. So as opposed to the closed world, which is easier to software engineers, but for in the open world, it's much harder. But it also opens up more possibilities. You're no longer constrained to that 150 degrees left and right and 30 degrees up and down, that kind of thing.
Yes, we have. Go ahead.
I just was going to say, I think with augmented reality, I mean, one of the advantages that you have there, and there's different ways of doing it, but the interaction, things done now with like Leap Motion in terms of where you're trying to use your hands as a means of interacting within the space. But really, in the full virtuality, it's an animation of your hands. It's not really the full dexterous use of your hands. And when you are able to bring the view of your hands into that interaction, where you actually can see exactly where they are and exactly what they're touching, whether that's done with a depth key, where it just pulls them out and puts them into the full reality, and then you're actually seeing these floating real things, or it's the sort of transparency of seeing them actually with the overlay of the graphics. I think it's that much more dynamic in what you can do as far as your integration of the dexterous dynamic that we have as hands, and the realism of the experience of interacting.
We have one last question.
I just had it was quick. I noticed that Robert had kind of a maybe on memory. They were talking about going into the thing and thinking I experienced that versus I watched that. Do you want to say something on that?
Me personally?
I saw you made kind of.
No, just the idea that your kids come home and they feel that they've been there. I find that disappointing, and I would tell them, no, you haven't. And I think that, as especially a child, like sensory immersion is really crucial for development, and I would be very sad to live in a world where field trips are done virtually. I mean, that's already happening, frankly, and I think that we're very far from kind of the promise of virtual reality, the meaning of that term becoming truly meaningful. We're quite far from that. This is going to be an entertainment platform and a commerce platform, and it's going to be really great and useful for people, and it's going to change lives in the medical side, but it's not going to be reality. And so I just want to have a reality check about kind of where we're at with with the level of immersion.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for attending. Thank you for the members of the panel.
Thank you, Dora.
Have a good afternoon.